Could you tell me how the Monkees came to be?
You know, there is so much bullshit about how the Monkees originated. I thought, well, since I'm one of the producers, I'd be in a position to tell you how it all started. Originally, there were three of us. We were hired by the National Geographic to take photos of the deepest canyon in Mexico. And the reason why was because helicopters would get sucked into the draft. So we would go in by land. Well, this turned out to be almost impossible to do, but we had our Woody Jeep. It wasn't a Jeep, but an old Woody. It was shaped like a Jeep. And we had dark curtains and guns because we were going to have to go through some pretty tough land. One of the guys would drive, and the other two of us, there were three altogether. And by the way, the other two were really, really good musicians. I was not. And but we're 17 years old, 18 years old, something like that. And we had decided that we would stop off on occasion on the way down. And I remember we wanted to go to West Memphis, Arkansas. And West Memphis was a pretty wild town in those days, and it was very, very segregated. Uh, I think the Emmett Till case came up about a year later. In any event, you could get good drink and great blues in the bars. So we went into one bar, and the musicians playing, they're all black, were raised on a stage about so high, and about 4 feet. And there was a chain around the stage as well. And we didn't know it, but my musician friends just wanted to talk to these guys about the blues, and that apparently was not permitted. So the cops found an excuse to jail us, and we were really pissed off about it, and about segregation, and a bunch of other things that 18-year-olds have a right to speak about. So the next day, I remember this now, there was an opening of a movie. It was called From Here to Eternity, and I think it won about 8 or 9 Academy Awards. And there was a big line all the way around the block. And we put Mark, one of the two musicians, on the line. And we had spent the night in jail. And we took the lead out of the shotguns. We had 2 shotguns and I think a pistol. And Mark was on the line, and we took the empty shot and fired it at Mark, and then jumped out of the car, picked up Mark, and threw him into the Woody, and drove straight to Mexico. Well, this left an unsolved murder on the books of Memphis. And you can actually trace the Monkees to that event because we were filled with we thought, comical misadventure. And the next stop, I think, was in Acapulco. Acapulco was a pretty wild town on the, on the west coast of Mexico. And there was a nightclub there, and we got a job playing intermission uh, as an intermission band. And the nightclub was quite famous for its sort of circular shape, and it overlooked the ocean, but particularly it overlooked all the rocks that were very close to the nightclub. And a diver would climb up very, very slowly to the top, and the water would only fill this 20-foot area that he would leap into. And it was a very precarious jump, about 100 feet. And people were thrilled to be able to see this gentleman. I would play drums. He carried a torch, the diver. I would play drums to make the thing a little bit more exciting. The event, he'd be going all the way up like this, and I'd be playing tum, 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 and and then I'd go to the bar while he stood there and waited and waited and waited. And I'd go to the bar. I had a premature, in the sense that it wasn't fashionable, long hair at the time, and I had borrowed my dad's leather, sort of a suede jacket, and I'd go to the bar, and I'd sit down, and all the tourists be waiting, and I'd say, I hope the fuck he kills himself. They'd look at me and say, when you talk that way? And I'd say, you talk that way too if you were left here at the age of 14 by your mother and father. You haven't been able to get out of the country, you have no passport, and you're locked here. Believe me, I've seen that guy do this 100 times, 1,000 times, and he always makes it. So that's why. That's a very cynical attitude, they'd say. And next day, I'd get those tourists, the same ones, and put them in a glass boat, a glass floor. And he would jump off the boat and go straight down, and the tourists would look. Holy macaroni, they'd look down straight as he disappeared. Well, in fact, he just swam over to the bow, and there he had tied some coral that we bought for 10 cents in town. Well, it was things of this sort that inspired me to write about these things. And that I did because some years later I was in Hollywood and I wrote a pilot. Now, remember, this is sort of middle 50s. The Beatles hadn't arrived yet. The Beatles were in the 60s. So I wrote a pilot, and it was more or less about a folk group at that time. But nonetheless, it was about the misadventures of a group, and that's basically how the Monkees began. When the Beatles came along, it made the thing saleable because the Beatles had done A Hard Day's Night, and the Monkees were given, by virtue of their success, permission to be born. And that is the story as it really happened.